Welcome to TST Broadcasting and the Resort Management and Marketing Channel. This is Shep Altschuler, publisher of Timesharing Today. We are being joined today by Jim Bento, General Manager of the Forest Glen Inn, located in North Conway, New Hampshire. John Funk, partner in the law firm Gallagher, Callahan, and Gartrell, and Scott MacGregor, President of U.S. Operations for ARC Resorts. We are looking at the collaborative effort that was made to successfully repurpose the Forest Glen Inn. Hi, Jim, Scott, and John. Welcome to the broadcast. And Jim, I'd like to start by having you tell us about the history of the resort.
Sure. Forest Glen Inn has had some type of lodging on this site since the late 1800s. The original building burnt down in 1969, but the motel operator at the time rebuilt it and continued to operate it until 1979, when it was sold to a developer to develop it as a timeshare.
Was it purposely built or rebuilt as a timeshare by the developer, or did you maintain the motel environment? How did that work?
No, it was a conversion by the developer where the hotel was converted into the present configuration of a timeshare.
So tell us about the resort amenities. What are they like, and a little bit about the units?
Sure. We set on 6.6 acres. We have an outdoor pool. We have a picnic area, playground, tennis, basketball, shuffleboard, saunas. We have bicycles available. We have hot tubs, and we have a game room. We have 27 units. We have 9 one-bedroom units, and we have 18 studios. And
they fully appointed? Do they have kitchens, or they're more like motel units?
No, all of our units have stove, refrigerator, microwave. They all have a regular kitchen. It's referred to as a mini kitchen because the appliances are apartment size and not full size. But they do have all the appliances needed.
So, John, what was the type of ownership that was being sold under the timeshare plan?
At the time that I was contacted by the developer, Robert Forcier, there was no form of ownership at the resort. It had been the hotel, motel prior to that time. And so Mr. Forcier asked me to help him design a timeshare product. In the 1970s, timeshare was going through an evolution. It had started as right to use with a fixed term. Then it evolved into a deeded type of ownership. Because this was an existing building and it had not been converted into condominiums, we decided that the best approach was to set it up as an association of owners, where the purchasers would become members of the association. Owners Association operated resort with a right-to-use scheme that was imposed on it so that the owners would have the rights to use specific units for specific designated time periods.
Just define the difference between that arrangement and what might be considered a deed in perpetuity, so our listeners would get to understand that right to use aspect of it. What are the details of that?
In a typical timeshare project that has a deed, a unit is divided into typically 50 separate deeded interests, and those interests relate to a specific week, or they could be floating to certain categories of weeks. And when the deed is issued to the owner has a perpetual right to occupy the premises during his or her specific week. In contrast, the model that we developed for Forest Glen was one in which the association owned the entire real estate, and when a purchaser became an owner at the resort, the purchaser became a member of the association and established and was able to avail himself or herself of the right to use a specific unit for a specifically designated time period. So in the case of a deeded timeshare resort, the owners have a direct ownership in specific units, whereas in the association-owned resort, the members are the owners of the real estate collectively through the association?
At TBMA, when we first started, and Scott MacGregor will remember this, we were talking about a tipping point of timeshares that had a 10% delinquency rate. And that seemed to be the critical factor, that if you moved into those double digits, you might be heading for trouble. And we're starting to see now it's not only double digits, but they're moving up into the 20, 30% of delinquencies, along with defaults, some cases higher. And Scott, would you generally agree with that trend that we're beginning to see now coming up more aggressively in the marketplace?
Certainly across the country, Shep, the resorts that are not in an active sales program are falling further behind each year by having more unpaid or intervals owned that not by people that are paying assessments. So it is certainly an increasing problem across the country.
Right, and that's leading to resort proactive board members and resort managers, as is the case up at Forest Glen Inn, where they recognize a pattern has developed and they're taking action. And by taking action, they're avoiding potential chaos. So tell us, how you got involved and what your findings were that led to the decision to repurpose the property.
Well, I'm from New England and was familiar with the property and have known Jim for some time through ARDA and through TBMA, but it was certainly through TBMA that the conversation began about the sustainability of properties, and I had been doing sustainability studies for timeshare resorts. And a sustainability study, really, it's a bit of a misnomer. It's really a feasibility study for a business that's in active operation. And Jim and a couple of his board members had come to recognize that they were at a point where they were seeing increased delinquencies at the property. They hadn't been successful in finding a sales organization that was willing to come in and make a firm commitment to the property. But on the other hand, the property was operating extremely well. North Conway is a very competitive market. There's probably more than 70, Jim will know the number, but more than 70 lodging environments in North Conway. And Forest Glen was always in the top 5 or 6 on the TripAdvisor ratings. It was well-managed, clean, a great vacation destination, but more and more the board realized that it was being used for rental purposes more so than timeshare use purposes, and they questioned that. They questioned whether that was the right path to continue on. So they asked me to come in and do a study of the options that they had, whether it was reconfiguring the units or changing something about the legal structure of the property, or finding a sales organization that was willing to come in and make a long-term commitment to them. And that study was thoughtfully considered. We spent close to a year accumulating data and working back and forth with the board, talking with sales organizations, talking with the exchange providers, and just came to the conclusion that the highest and best use of that property really wasn't as a timeshare. It was in a situation where the point values through the various exchange companies weren't substantial enough to make it worthwhile for a sales company. And it's a small property. It's 29 units, so some of the reconfiguration or redevelopment or reinvestment options just didn't make a lot of sense. And so through a long iterative process, the board went out to its members and began the process of asking what they thought and educating them as to what the options were that were available to them.
So, John, tell us what role your firm played in this transitionary process.
Certainly, Shep. When Jim and Scott approached us in looking at what their options were, what we explained to them about this particular project, which in some regards made it unique, was that because the association owned the property, the timeshare regime could be terminated and the property could be sold by a vote of the owners of the association. So what we what we did is, once the options were clear and they were presented to the owners for a vote, the owners voted to terminate the project and to sell the property. Because it was operated strictly under the association and the association's bylaws, and because we had anticipated years earlier that we wanted to have a mechanism for terminating the timeshare project once its usefulness had run its course, we had a relatively simple mechanism in the bylaws for terminating the timeshare program. So we worked with Jim and Scott in developing the resolutions and properly presenting them to the members of the association for a vote. And when they voted, there was clear direction as to what Jim had to do to dispose of the property once the timeshare regime was no longer operative.
So, Jim, did you, going through this process, did you run into any objections, concerns that were raised by the owners?
Absolutely. I mean, some of these owners were second and third generation owners. We've been at timeshare for 37 years, so there was definitely concern, primarily in their summer weeks, for them to understand why it was so busy in July and August and September, but we couldn't sustain it beyond that. And concerns about when the opportunity to either special assess or raise fees, and they just weren't in a position to do that. And so communications with the owners through newsletters, through quite often newsletters and news going out to them really helped to answer some of those questions.
Did you engage them in direct communications by phone, where they're calling into a hotline, or was it primarily through the newsletters or maybe email? And I know you do have information posted on your website, so was there any other means used to assure them?
Sure. One of the largest points of contact was the survey, the owner survey that we did after Scott's work with the sustainability study, and then following up with that with the results of the survey and what it actually meant and what some of their fellow owners and members had in mind. And that was probably one of the largest pieces of communication. Beyond that, we posted communications fairly regularly, not only to email and website, but in actual hard copy U.S. mail, kept them pretty informed about every 45 to 60 days in the process as to what was moving forward.
So when this process gets resolved, is there anything in it for the owners themselves that are sort of giving up their rights? John, do you want to address that?
Sure, Shep. The way these terminations are designed is that the properties, once the timeshare regime has been terminated, the properties are sold, and you put it out to a competitive marketing process, and you try to attain the best price that you can for the property. And then once the expenses of the sale are covered and any expenses of the association are paid, then the net amount distributed proportionately to the owners based on their interest in the association. So at the end of the day, the net amount that's distributed goes to the owners, and they enjoy the benefits of that return of their purchase of a timeshare interest in the resort.
This did require a vote. I think you stated that before. Is this a simple majority of the owners or some other formula?
I believe in this case, and Jim, you can confirm that, I believe it was a 2/3 vote.
Yes, it was. 2/3 of the membership. Mm-hmm.
And was that a lengthy process to reach that 2/3 level? How long did that take?
It actually took us beyond the originally called meeting and extended for 2 months. So it was about a 90-day process to collect all of the 2/3. It involved some phone work that Scott helped us with, and some, trying to gather those things.
Can you speak to the cost of these kinds of transitions, Scott? Maybe you could address that. How costly is this process for a legacy resort that may be running into some cash flow issues. But how costly is it for them to go through a process like this?
Well, it can be potentially extremely costly. Due to the legal structure of Forest Glen, we had some great advantages in that we didn't have to do a great deal of title work because all the individual interests weren't deeded as John described earlier. So in this case, the association spent its money on conducting the study, on engaging its legal counsel, in guiding it through the process and creating the ultimate plan for the termination of the property and for communication with the owners. But if in a deeded property, the cost can be extraordinary to pay the cost of examining title, clearing title, going through the legal structure, and even potentially gaining the quorum and votes needed to even make a decision, because other states and other properties have much even higher bars or thresholds in terms of getting quorum and owner participation. So this was a very fortuitous situation that allowed a very efficient execution of the owner's desires, but it's not often the case in a deeded property. And in a deeded property, they may find that the cost of doing all this are beyond the association's means. But the good news is there are companies and entities out there that are willing to step in and help defray or absorb some of those costs by considering what the ultimate value of the real estate may be upon the final sale of the property.
Jim, was there good intra-board communications? Was that an issue, or did everybody work in harmony to make this transition happen?
We have a fantastic board. I mean, they're all members, some of them for the full 37 years, some of them as recent as their second generation, and have owned their own week for about 5 or 6 years. So they all really pulled together. No one liked the decision, but they were fearless in making the decision.
A lot of this path that you're going down when you're doing these sustainability studies and you come to the conclusion that a change, a transition is necessary, up comes the question, okay, who's going to buy the place? So Scott, why don't you talk about that from your experience? What about finding a buyer? How challenging or how easy is that process?
What we're really talking about here through the entire process is determining what's the highest and best use of this piece of property. Is it as a timeshare? That's the existential question that the sustainability study tries to answer. Is the highest and best use of this property still as a timeshare, or might it be something else? And if you determine that it might be something else, you really need the real estate professionals, people with both real estate experience and perhaps real estate development experience, come in and help you explore those opportunities. You just don't want to make the assumption that it's going to be a condo or an inn or an apartment building. You really want to look at the land, you want to look at the environment, the community, and all of the factors that a developer would consider of building a new project to try to figure out what the proper direction for the property is. The other thing that's critical, and Forest Glen, again, was a perfect study in how this all comes together right, is you have to look at the overall community in which the resort resides and consider that there's lots of other stakeholders out there. Obviously, the primary stakeholders are the owners of the resort itself, and then the management and others associated with the property. But there's other timeshare resorts in the community. There's sold-out associations. There's associations and active development. And so part of our process was to reach out to some of those, particularly some of the other developers in the community, and let them know what we were working on so it wasn't a surprise, and get their feedback and support. Because at the end of the day, if there's a community with a number of timeshare resorts and we're able to identify those that may be weaker and take those off the market, the rising tide floats all boats. It helps all of the other properties. So as we did that outreach to other developers, we were introduced to people that had those areas of expertise that I discussed in this particular community. And one of those ended up being the real estate broker with specific expertise, both with this type of property and in this geographic region, that was able to work with the board and ultimately help them to find a buyer for the real estate.
Jim, the issue of active sales was mentioned a few times during this interview, and we know that many HOAs are dealing with the piling up of unsold inventory and revenue generation. So tell us some of the specifics about what you found as you went through the sustainability analysis.
We went out nationwide with a request for proposal to 16 companies, and with very little or no response due to the issue of studio units. Their response was that they had no market, no resale market for the studios. They would be willing to help us out with one bedrooms, but had no market at all for a timeshare studio, and that was where our issues became very critical.
Did seasonality have a factor, or was it primarily the types of units that were going to be available for active sales?
The types of units were more important than seasonality. Just the size of the studios made them not very easily marketable.
So, Jim, also, we know that when a resort may be winding down, there are owners that like being involved in timesharing, and they want to stay as timeshare owners somehow. So how did you address that issue with your owners?
We made contact with several local properties in the area and partnered with them with some offers to our members if they wanted to stay in the local area. We also contacted a property management company who had timeshare properties in several other areas in New England, in the local New England area, and offered and partnered with them to offer our membership those opportunities as well.
Yeah, now what management company were you working with, and was that effective or helpful in the process?
Yes, we worked with, from a relationship through ARDA and TBMA with VRI, and they worked out 3 properties that they offered to our membership with some special offers and discounts only available to our membership, and that was very helpful as far as other opportunities for them.
Now, Jim, how about staffing? Everybody on board working for the resort knows that something's going on. What kind of issues are you dealing with there?
Well, we have a tremendous staff without a lot of turnover, and once the announcement was made, we offered key staff members, key front desk personnel, maintenance, retention bonuses to stay with us through the end of business, and that has worked tremendously. I would strongly recommend those types of things to put in place to keep your key people, because otherwise they're in a position where they have to look elsewhere, but we've got them right through the end of operations.
And what is the timing now for winding everything down or winding everything up, because you're going to be moving forward with a whole new regime there?
December 30th is our last day of daily operations, and we are working with a buyer who anticipates reopening immediately through sometime in mid to late January, and moving forward as a hotel motel with nightly business, and they are very enthusiastic about getting started as soon as possible. So there'll be very little time when it's shut down per se.
Now, we're hoping to make this a case study on positive outcomes at the upcoming TBMA meeting in Providence in May, and I appreciate your joining us on this interview, and hopefully we'll see you in May at TBMA. And this includes this TST broadcast. If you are interested in commenting on this program or in learning more about sustainability studies, please email shep@tsttoday.com or call Shep Altschuler at 201-924-7435.